It's not uncommon for people to think that the Bible and economics don't have anything to do with each other. But let me suggest that economics is fundamentally a moral issue that the Bible actually has a lot to say about. The Bible has a great deal to say about economic life, and appropriately so, because fundamentally economics is a moral issue in the same way that politics is a moral issue, because both of those arenas, economics especially, is about how we order our lives together in community and how we share the burdens and benefits of that ordering of life together. Those are fundamentally moral issues that ought to concern all of us, particularly as we live together in our communities. The Bible actually has more to say about economic life than it does about heaven and hell put together, which tells us that economic life is really important to God and makes a big difference to the communities, particularly the community of God's people. We use an approach in this segment that we call biblical theology, which is talking about how economics is developed through as the Scripture is progressively revealed. So we'll start with this at creation, and economics is very clearly a part of what God had in mind at creation. The dominion mandate that God gives in Genesis 1 and 2, putting the human race as stewards of creation, is I think fundamentally about economics and management of the world, with the exercise of entrepreneurial traits, with creativity and innovation and perseverance and other important virtues. Human beings were designed to unlock the things that God had sealed up in creation through His general revelation. And I think it's fair to say that an honest profit that a company makes is an indication of how well they are actually fulfilling the dominion mandate and serving their communities. Now, in the Mosaic Law was designed to do two primary things in terms of economics. One is it was to ensure that the fundamental exchanges that took place in their economy, which is what sort of constitutes economic life, were both fair and sort of free of fraud and deception. This is why in the law there's a statement in Exodus 19 that talks about having weights and measures that are accurate and fair and just, so that in doing so would prevent merchants from ripping off each other. The other thing that the law was designed to do was to ensure that economic life functioned in order to take care of those who were unable to take care of themselves. And the law set out lots of provisions for people who were poor, who were needy, who were unable to work, unable to take care of themselves, or who had fallen on hard times and maybe temporarily unable to take care of themselves. And there were numerous provisions in the Mosaic Law, such as the law of gleaning and the tithe and the law of redemption and the year of Jubilee and things like that were designed to help give the poor a regular renewal of opportunity in order to make a living for themselves. Remember that economic life in biblical times was totally different than it is today. It was largely agricultural, it was subsistence level, there were some small trades that went on, but for the most part, the vast majority of people in the ancient world were desperately poor. They were equal. It's just they were equally poor and struggling. In the way the Scripture intended economic life to go was that people would be able to use their gifts and skills and talents in order to exercise entrepreneurial traits, so that they would generate enough income and revenue so that the poor could actually be cared for. Now, in an agricultural society, it was largely what economists call a zero-sum arrangement. That is, usually when one person prospers, is at the expense of another. And in economic life in the ancient world, up until about probably just after the medieval period, it was largely people at the very top controlled almost all of the wealth, and they generally got wealthy as a result of theft, oppression, extortion, or some sort of misuse of power that enabled them to obtain their wealth at somebody else's expense. That's why we say it was largely a zero-sum arrangement. It's like, what we mean by that is that the size of the pie was generally fixed, and if I got a bigger slice, that means you got a smaller one. It wasn't until the advent of genuinely market-based economies on a widespread scale that we were able to actually increase the size of the pie and end up with bigger shares for everyone as the economic growth took place. So the law was intended to take care of the poor and to encourage fair exchange. The prophets, in general, amplified that part of the law that ensured that the poor were adequately cared for. In fact, I think the prophets are so clear about this that I think it's fair to say that it was very, very important to the Old Testament prophets. Just one instance of this we'll see in Jeremiah chapter 22. Jeremiah makes a very pointed statement where he puts it like this, beginning in verse 15. He said, "Does it make you a king to have more and more cedar? Did not your father have food and drink?" Speaking of the king before him. "He did what was right and just, and so all went well with him. He defended the cause of the poor and needy, and so all went well." And here's the punchline. "Is that not what it means to know me, declares the Lord?" You get a similar statement in the wisdom literature in Proverbs 14, verse 31. Again, a very pointed statement. "Whoever oppresses the poor shows contempt for their maker, but whoever is kind to the needy honors God." And Jesus, when he came bringing the kingdom, made it really clear that that emphasis on serving the poor and the victimized and the marginalized continued in his ministry. In his first public ministry in the Gospel of Luke, for example, he cites from Isaiah 61 that he has come in order to serve the poor and the needy among us. Here, listen to what he says in Luke chapter 4. Beginning in verse 18, he puts it like this. "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners, recovery of sight for the blind, and set the oppressed free, and proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." And he goes on later to say, "Today, in his coming, this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." That there was something about his ministry among the poorest and the neediest among us that was an indication that Christ had come in his kingdom. This is similar in a similar phrase we find in Matthew chapter 11, when the very disillusioned disciples of John the Baptist are coming to Jesus asking if he is the Messiah who was to come, since John the Baptist was in prison at the time. And they asked the question like this, "Are you the one who is to come, or should we expect someone else?" Jesus replied to them, "Go back and report to John what you hear and see. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and good news is proclaimed to the poor." That was the indication that Jesus had come in his kingdom, was that those who were previously marginalized are now included in the realm of God's kingdom. And then Jesus, I think, in one of his clearest statements in Matthew 25, says that great statement, whatever you did for the least of these, my brothers, you did for me. I think it's fair to say that from both Old and New Testament, that a constituent element of faithfully following Christ is a warm and tender heart for the poor and the marginalized among us. What we mean by that is that a critical part, a non-negotiable component of faithfully following Jesus is developing that kind of tender, caring heart for the least among us. So the Bible has actually a lot to say about economic life in the community, less so about normative economic systems. Those, I think, we see more of that on a more practical basis on what works to take care of the most vulnerable among us. So in terms of the ends of an economic system, the Bible is very clear: to provide meaningful work, to provide opportunities for people to support themselves, and to take care of the poorest and neediest among us. The means by which those are accomplished, I think there's room for a bit more discussion about what some of the best and most effective ways are to do that.